It's Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here today with Rebecca DeHart. She is currently CEO of FairCount, an organization that partners with hard-to-count communities to achieve a fair and accurate count of all people in Georgia and the United States in the 2020 census. Prior to that, Rebecca served as the executive director of the Democratic Party of Georgia from 2014 until 2019. She is also founder and president of Steel Cut Strategies, a campaign communications and government affairs firm, a graduate of the Loyola University of Chicago, go Ramblers. Rebecca has enjoyed an extensive career in lobbying, campaign management, and advocacy. So Rebecca, thank you very much for inviting us to your home here in Atlanta. Looking forward to talk Georgia politics with you.
Great.
So let's start. Tell me about your childhood and upbringing. Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised in a little unincorporated village outside Kalamazoo, Michigan, called Texas Township. It's much different now than it was when I was growing up. And I went to school at Portage Public Schools, which is a sort of a suburb community of Kalamazoo. And lived there my whole life. In fact, my folks still live in the same house that I grew up in their 80s now. Mm-hmm. And then I left Kalamazoo to go to college in Chicago.
So your family, were they involved in politics, interested in politics at all?
Not at all. No, my dad is a Republican and, a Michigan Republican. He is a very business-minded, centered man, but never really made voting part of what we did. Like, I never went and voted with my parents. The first time ever in a voting booth was when I turned 18. So it's really a profession that I found in kind of serendipitous ways.
So how did you first become interested in politics?
So I think I've always had a sort of a passion for fairness. I think even as a kid, my parents would say that as well. And a real passion for what I perceived to be right or wrong or unjust. When I was in high school, I became the editor of our first school newspaper, the Central Stampede. And at that time, there was a man named John Engler who was the governor, and he is a big name in Republican who's who's. I think he went on to be with the National Manufacturer Association and other places. But he was a two-term governor in Michigan, and there was an accreditation thing where they wanted you to have a state-sponsored or a state-certified diploma in order to graduate. So we were the first class, everybody had to take this test. I was in all these AP classes with a bunch of other kids that were in all the AP classes. And we started to find out that they didn't have the grading of the test provisions ready, to be able to fully suit their needs. And we're farming them out to college students in different places. I remember this one woman I went to high school with, she had a full ride writing scholarship to Iowa Workshop, which is like the best in the nation. Absolutely. She failed the writing part of the exam. And I really felt it was just unjust. And I ended up writing an editorial for my school newspaper that was submitted to the Michigan Interscholastic Press Association. I ended up winning first place, and it spurred sort of a protest where we all refused to put our stickers on our diplomas and refused the state certification. So that was like sort of my first foray, I think, into dissidence and political action. Mm-hmm. And I was really interested when I went into college too. I went through like 9 different majors, and I ended up getting my social work degree. And I was really interested in social work. Loyola has a great macro side of it as well, and how policy affects so many people. Mm-hmm. And so my first job out of college, well, it was an internship that turned into a job, as I was a counselor at Hull House, which is the first social service agency founded by Jane Addams in Chicago. And I worked at the Women's Counseling Center with survivors of domestic violence. And so I would go to court with them and do support groups. And I had this amazing mentor, Maxine Floral, who I'm so lucky to still keep in touch with. She was the founder of the first homeless center for women in the United States. And just learned a lot about the system. And I had this one case in particular where a woman was in a same-sex partnership. This was in the 90s.
Right.
And the judge threw it out and said it was a cat fight and that it couldn't happen between two women. And I was astounded. I mean, this woman had a grill thrown on her. She had a lacerated cornea, all this stuff. And she just spiraled. I mean, it was so sad. I mean, she felt like no one was on her side. She couldn't get any help. She ended up, thought she would be suicidal. And it was just a really pivotal time to sort of witness that. And I was furious. And I just wanted to know, how can this be? Like, how can this be the law? How can this judge get away with this? How is this judge even elected? You know, I didn't even know any of this stuff at this point. And so my college roommate from freshman year had a mom in Georgia who was a head lobbyist and did all the progressive stuff and was just like a who's and worked for Zell Miller and all this. She said, you should call my mom and talk to her. Like, this is what she does. And so I called her mom, Sue Sleska Hamilton. And we hit it off on the phone, and she invited me to come down and work for her during the 2002 Georgia legislative session so I could learn how, you know, policy could be changed and made. And I took her up on it, and I packed up my car and moved down here, not knowing anyone, never having even been
Sight
in a
unseen,
state.
huh?
No, never even been in a state capitol before. I'd been here for the '96 Olympics to watch the equestrian. That's the only time I think I had been like further south than Kentucky. And yeah, showed up on my first day of work. It was the year they were doing the Confederate flag.
Oh, yeah.
I had never even seen a Confederate flag before in my life. I had to walk through to this big gold dome filled with people outside waving the Confederate flag with thick accents and dressed in suits. And I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I mean, I really questioned my life decisions. I thought this was just so over my head. I couldn't figure it out. And Sue ended up being just the most incredible mentor to me. Really believes in baptism by fire, really believes in training young women how to work in politics and policy and fight for what's right. We had all sorts of clients. That was the year we also did the anti-predatory lending, and that was her client.
Right.
She worked for the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, the Police Benevolent Association, the domestic violence clinics, the sexual assault centers, and she also represented at what was at that point NARAL Pro-Choice Georgia, as well as Feminist Women's Health Center. So she really carried all the reproductive justice cases. And she was incredible, and she still is. She's still so important to me in my life. But yeah, so I worked with her that session. Then I got a job at the Democratic Party for the 2002 elections, which did not go well, as you all know, in 2002, and went back and worked with her again the next session, and then continued on my career.
So what were you doing when you were working with Sue's firm? What exactly were your tasks?
I was her assistant. And what is so brilliant, and what I think I still carry with me to this day, and I also really value, particularly working with young women and training them, is knowing the ins and outs of how the process works. So lobbying in her firm was much less, you know, what people think of lobbying, of the wine and dining. Sure, we did all that. There were no limits back then. So we had a lot of committee dinners and a lot of all of this. But it was also understanding the procedures, sometimes better than the legislators did themselves.
Sure.
And, you know, understanding how to go to the hopper and ensure all your clients are aware, and what lawyers you need to tap in order to get language over to legislative counsel to speed up the process to get the outcome. And it was about relationships. And I think that was the other thing too. You know, back then people used to smoke and drink in the Capitol, you know, and you'd sit in these legislators' offices, some of which are still there, so I won't out them. But like Senator Renee Kemp, who sadly passed on, who was the chair of Senate Judiciary, you know, we would sit there late nights and smoke cigarettes and drink wine and watch the happenings on the floor. And Sue always taught me, you're always the first one to show up and you're the last one to leave, because you always get work done besides, you know, when you normally did. I mean, sometimes you'd get more work done catching a legislator outside on a cigarette break than you would pulling them in on the ropes. So it was really just entrenched in that. I have one story I'd love. It's one of my favorite stories about Sue. It was, you know, I'm brand new, like 3 weeks in. House Rules Committee is back up, you know, because they don't start on the first day of session. Calvin Smyrie is the chairman of the Rules Committee. And Sue says, Rebecca, I need you to get Max Davis, who has also sadly passed away, to, you know, move an amendment on a bill in this Rules Committee. You just need to pass him this note. Well, back then they didn't wear name tags. And so I remember looking at Sue, I was like, I can't believe I have to do this. She needs this amendment today. And I said, okay. And then I called after. I was like, Sue, what does Max Davis look like? And she said, I don't know. He's a white guy, about 6 feet tall, gray hair. He may have a cigar in his pocket. And I was like, okay. And I turned and looked in the rules committee room, and she described every single person there. And I remember I went up to a man that fit the description very well, who was Tom Buck out of Columbus. And I was like, excuse me, are you Max Davis? And he was so sweet. He was like, no, honey, but I'll introduce you to him. And so he walked me over and had a good laugh. And after that, actually, Tom was always rather kind to me.
That the homogeneity of some committees through the years really stands out. So in 2002, of course, the Democratic Party of Georgia was still in control of the politics. Did you do any lobbying with Sue when it changed over, or were you with the? So explain the operations from a lobbying perspective. The operations of the legislature when the Democrats controlled the House versus when the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, and this is sort of my editorial, but my lobbying career, I lobbied with Sue for 2002 and 2003 legislative sessions. And then in 2004 and 2005, I was the lobbyist for the state. I actually worked in the Purdue administration as the executive director of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, which was, administratively attached to the executive branch and housed in the Department of Corrections. And then in 6, 7, 8, and 9, I was a lobbyist at the trial lawyers. And then I took on Sue's practice in 11, 12, 13. So those were the years I was down there. So I saw a massive change, I think, in the way that lobbying happened. When I first started, there weren't a lot of women lobbyists. Sue was she was a master of her trade. I mean, everyone thought so. Everyone respected Sue. She worked for a lot of powerful entities like the trial lawyers and others, and she really understood how it all worked. But there was always these conglomerations of, the older white guy lobbyists who weren't always at the Capitol every day, but apparently got all the things done. But there was a lot of contract lobbyists back then. That was more of a thing. There was a bevy of lobbyists, and people would hire them. And so you would have some more divergent clients. I remember Don Cheeks out in Augusta, the senator. And I remember he was so good, if I remember correctly, on predatory lending. So good. And he was not so good for us on choice. And I remember sitting in his office, and we would work so hard on the right changes, and then we would try and talk to him about another bill, and he'd be like, nope, not with you. But there wasn't a ton of animosity. You could sit and have sort of, Sue wasn't, there wasn't a moniker that she was the, abortion lobbyist. She was able to carry all of these different, contracts and really sort of compartmentalize, and the legislators were able to too. I really saw a change post-2005 in the lobbying world, where lobbying became more in-house. There was more of a governmental affairs. I was working for the trial lawyers at the time, and it was completely normal for them to hire a Republican lobbyist and a Democrat lobbyist, and they wouldn't cross over. That wasn't the case when I first started. It was definitely more of a one person kind of did it all. Interesting.
Very. So taking a step back to 2002, you said you're new to Georgia, so you're new to Georgia politics, so you don't necessarily know Roy Barnes or Max Cleland from Adam. What was it like on election night when the governor lost and then the state senate is being lost? How did you feel? What was your reaction?
Oh gosh, I remember being at the hotel. So I was with the Democratic Party of Georgia. I had been hired as a regional. Well, I was hired as a research analyst. Ironically, I was the one who wrote the first book on Kemp. When he ran for Senate,
state Senate,
against Doug Haynes, I think it was Doug Haynes' seat. So I just think it's funny that, he was my first introduction, my first task was to go and to do that work. And then I got promoted to regional field director. And it's funny because I really worked northwest Georgia down to about Carrollton and over. So I had the Mike Snow up in Chickamauga, Tracy Stallings out in Carrollton. Oh gosh, and there were more. I can't recall all of them, but those two in particular I had a good relationship with, and they all lost. So I remember.
Did you
know,
have Speaker Murphy's race? He would have been in Bremen.
He was in Bremen. That was, what year was that when, what's his name, who became the senator?
Oh,
Heath.
that was 02.
Was that 02?
It was all the...
If I did have his, it's not, I don't think they did work there.
Sure.
I don't recall. That was my region. That's so interesting. I never went out to Bremen. I had met the speaker through working with the trial lawyers the session before, but yeah, no, that's interesting. No. I'd have to go back and look at some old notes. There were some really great folks.
What'd you think of Speaker Murphy?
Very limited interaction. The lore that surrounded him was probably some of the most interesting parts of learning, I think, about politics. He and he would have never known who I was. I mean, we had no interaction.
Sure.
I'd been in the speaker's office sitting with Sue while she talked to him about things, and I just was quiet. I got to know Dubose Porter quite a bit, who was Speaker Pro Tem and had challenged him that first year. Dubose is still one of the best humans I've ever known. He, not every legislator treated young women well. Surprising. 20 years ago. Probably not now either. There was still this prevailing thought that young women went to the Capitol to find a husband or a job or, I'm just like 6 feet tall, so I'm much taller than many of the legislators, and I learned to wear heels very quickly too. So like I would have stature; it was a power thing. And I can't tell you some of the things people said to me, or Larry Walker asking me how the weather is up there. It was just ridiculous. But Dubose, him, and there was a man named Pete. Oh gosh. Hardy Davis took his spot out in Augusta. He was a machinist. I'm so sad that I'm forgetting his last name right now because he was so special. But I would say those were two of the legislators that I met who wouldn't have ever blinked if I was a young woman in the Capitol. Like, they just treated me the same way they treated Sue, the same way they treated everyone else. And it was so refreshing. And both, especially my friendship with Dubose, we're still so close. But... So I apologize. I'm just diverted from your question. What was it?
We were talking about the 2002
Oh, yeah,
election.
what that was on that night. So, oh gosh. So I remember, I worked, this was when the Democratic Party was at the Spring Street office. They'd moved floors several times. I want to say we were on the 4th floor. Max Cleland's office was there. Roy Barnes' office was there. There was a bunch of us kids all working in the office. And I remember we had to work like 7 days a week. There was like, everybody wanted to just show how hard we were working in case Roy ever came by or in case, anybody ever did. And I had friends, of course, that were, heavy in the Barnes campaign and writing the oppo and stuff on Sunny. And I remember the night before at the coordinated campaign, putting together all the last minute things and all the flyers. And I was out by Greenbrier Mall putting tags on people's cars. And then I remember that night.
It's a very old fashioned sentence, putting tags on cars at malls.
It's so true. Wow. Yeah. I definitely used to put tags on cars in malls.
Did you ever go to the Blockbuster
Busy.
too?
Yeah, I did.
I'm only joking.
That's so true though, but it does show you how far it's changed and how far we've come. But we went to the hotel, the same hotel that they still hold everything at. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember a lot of that night. I think we were all sort of like lowers. Like we didn't go into the war rooms or anything like that. But I remember there was, gosh, I wish I could remember his name too. There was a contract, the campaign manager, who was on Roy's race, who brought us all together in a room and talked about how everyone had lost. And we were all looking at each other. People were crying. People were like feeling the weight of like what this meant. I didn't quite understand the weight of that loss at 22 years old in 2002, fresh in there, that I think other people had, or as I understand what loss has felt like later in life, where I have definitely felt the weight of it. But I remember everyone standing around and looking shocked. There was there was a lot of concern. It's interesting that night too. I remember it was my first taste of voter protection. There was a call that somebody had shown up at a precinct in Cobb County with a weapon. And this was also, wasn't this the first year we had the touchscreen voting?
It would have been.
And Chris Carpenter said, Rebecca, we're sending you to Cobb County to watch them tally the votes. That's why I was late to the hotel that night. And I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. It was complete. And nobody knew what they were supposed to do. What would it look like? Yeah. And I remember going in there, and there were other lawyers, and there were other people in voter protection, and there was a glass window, and we watched them with machines, and everything seemed okay. And then I showed up to the hotel just in time for the speech that we had lost everything. And I started going through my ticker of, my races. And I think I worked on Senator Edelman's race too. That was one of them. So he was good. And David Edelman and Leanna Levitan. She was good. But I think everyone else that I worked on lost. And it was, the flag was one of the biggest issues.
Sure.
Like that was interestingly, after that, I ended up working on Mike Snow's 2 other campaigns that happened before the 2004 election because they had recounts. They had to redo those elections because of the district lines, and it was right after the census.
Right,
and there was
there
was these allegations that people in Tennessee were voting in the race, and it was Jay Neal and Mike Snow, and they had 4 races in 2 years. We came back and won it that next spring when I managed his campaign solo. Then did he win or lose the third one? Neely was his campaign manager, and then of course he lost in 2004 and then went to go work for Department of Ag.
Well, that sounds exhausting for him.
Yeah. What a crazy, crazy time too. The other weird thing about working in Mike Snow's race in 2002, I don't know if y'all remember this, but this was the year that the funeral home, the crematorium,
That's right.
the licensure of the crematorium, it was the Ray Marsh family, that they weren't actually cremating the bodies. And Representative Snow at the time had carried a bill that, unbeknownst to him, he was by no means at fault, but allowed inspections to go unfinished over the years. And they were so close with the Marsh family. I mean, I want to say that even Mike Snow said that, somebody in his family had nannied him growing up. I mean, they were a real community-centered family. And so I just remember driving from Atlanta to Chickamauga every day. And I remember Mike Snow telling me, here I am with this Yankee young woman driving a Japanese car up here running my race in Chickamauga, but he loved me. And and going door to door and everybody was talking about this crematorium experience. It was wild.
So you go from running campaigns back to lobbying briefly in 2003. So then you take a job in the executive branch under Governor Sonny Perdue.
Yes.
What was that like as somebody who had experienced what you just described, now working for the individual who had defeated, ostensibly your boss and sort of titular party leader?
Right. Well, I think at that point I was still really close to my social work, like domestic violence roots,
Right.
And so it seemed like a marriage. Like it just seemed like the best of both worlds, to be able to work on policy, to be able to continue on lobbying and learn in that realm, and to really be an advocate for the state. I'll tell you, the governor was not really involved much on the Commission on Family Violence. Some governors have been, some have not been. Where I probably had the most interaction with him was with his appointees. The governor appointed, members of the House and the Senate, and then also the chair of the commission, who at that time was Chair Judge Wheeler out of Augusta. And he was wild. He was a cowboy of a judge, and Judge Seeliger had been the appointee under Barnes, but lost that quickly out of DeKalb. And so I had a Purdue-appointed judge, and I adored him. He was something else. But it was such a specialized issue. It was protecting families, that we could all come together. Although it was very controversial that first year. because this was the year that the Georgia first started certifying batterers intervention programs. Because there are some programs, that do more harm than good. There are some programs that can do good. And so it was the job of the State Commission on Family Violence to go through that certification process. And it got real dicey.
How do you, without getting into too many details on it, how do you mean?
Well, we were still at a time, and I think we still sadly would be at a time now in the legislature where not all legislators really believed in domestic violence. There was a lot of, are you telling me if my wife claimed I did this, that I could get sent to a batterers intervention program? It was, there were some real archaic thoughts about violence. And, Georgia had one of the highest homicide rates and fatality rates in the nation. And so we were really trying to do some, at the time and for the place, radical things to try and have a better systematic response. But it wasn't always easy convincing them that was a real issue.
I see. So how did you make the transition out of government to Georgia trial lawyers? You mentioned that Sue had worked for Georgia trial lawyers.
Yep, she was responsible for it. Yep. So Sue came to me about 2 years in at the Commission on Family Violence and said, the trial lawyers who I had lobbied with her for 2 years, and said in 2005, tort reform had just passed. And they got handed to them. They were out for their pound of flesh, and they got it. Tort reform passed all the medical malpractice limits and different things. And they said, the trial lawyers needs to rebuild. They've reassessed. And to their credit, the governor had been a trial lawyer. They had Speaker Murphy. It wasn't anything that they really needed to happen. There was a built-in influence. Yeah. And so they really had to start over, and they wanted to start, building on a grassroots level, going down into communities and connecting local lawyers with legislators and building relationships on both sides of the aisle. And although it's funny because this was the change, now they were going to hire a grassroots organizer at the trial lawyers that was both Democrat and one that was Republican. And so they pulled me away from my good government job and asked me if I would come on to do the Democratic organizing and my colleague was Connor Poe, who I think is with the Billboard Association now. He and I still randomly keep in touch, and he's on the Republican side, and he came in to do the organizing on the Republican side. And so we started hitting the road. I think that's really the first time, with the exception of Walker County, that I started to be able to drive through the state of Georgia and see just all the diversity that is all these different counties. I remember driving through Parrott, Georgia, and Camilla, and Moultrie, and meeting in these sometimes old, beautiful houses with lawyers and legislators, or going out to Hinesville and first meeting with Al Williams out there at it wasn't a Waffle House, it was a Huddle House, and him telling me the story of the marshes and really got to know legislators in a way that I never had before, because I went, and I went to where they were. I remember once I had to go meet Coach Williams. Was it Coach Williams? I'm so sorry if I'm getting his last name wrong. Everyone just called him Coach in DeKalb County. And he actually was in the middle of coaching at elementary school, and I went to the school and watched him coach for a couple minutes before school was over. But I got to see legislators in their homes. I sat in Mike Chokas's living room, in Americus, Georgia, back when he was still a Democrat before he switched. But I really just got to know them in a way that I never could at the Capitol. And it was so cool how they wanted to show their district to me. They wanted to show who they represented. They wanted to show how different it was from Atlanta, and why, they would do the things they do, or why they cared about what they did. It was such an excellent education for me.
So what was it about why travel to the legislators' districts with this job as opposed to buttonholing them on the third floor of the legislature?
I think it's the essence of organizing. You really got to go out there and meet people where they're at. And so, sometimes I was delivering PAC checks too. Don't get me wrong. I'd be out there supporting people for races over the years that I was with the trial lawyers. But I would go and meet with the local lawyer, whose office was on the second floor of some house with the real estate office down below in some part
sure.
of Georgia. And together we would go sit. I remember going out to Senator Harbison, and there's a very famous Burger King in Columbus. And I remember going up, there's like a meeting room.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a meeting room in this Burger King in Columbus. And I would bring local lawyers, and we would sit and have lunch and break bread, but in the district. And the goal was really for the legislator to get to know the lawyer there. One, so that they could better know civil justice issues.
Sure.
But two, so that they could also call on this lawyer for any help. Like the trial lawyers were really dedicated to using their members as resources for the legislators about other things. And, the goal was have this legislator have your cell phone so that if a question comes up, they can call you. I mean, that was sort of like the outcome. Like I remember Lynmore James, who is one of my favorite humans. He just passed away, a month ago maybe. Out of Montezuma, Georgia. And I remember driving to Montezuma, no cell service. And these were those back when we had these little blue Nokia phones too, so they were terrible and nobody texted and everything. But it was definitely
Snake, though,
pre
so that was
pre-BlackBerry. And I remember driving to Montezuma losing all connection. And I remember Lynmore said, meet me at the Meat and Three on the square. And I said, well, what's the name of the restaurant? And he said, I don't know. Because it's the Meat and Three that's on the square in Montezuma. And
how many can there be?
How many can there be? And I went there, and sure enough, there was only one. And I pulled up and went to the Meat and Three in Montezuma and had a delightful lunch. And, Lynmore James, his story is just incredible. And he was a farmer and he had all this land, and he was so excited to tell me about, his district and his world. And he actually was calling for help to see if we could get, he really wanted a veterinary school to be in Fort Valley in Peach County, which is one of the counties that he represented. And he wanted to talk to a lawyer about that. And that's how I knew we had achieved some success at that point, because we were able to pair a local lawyer with him to answer other legal questions that weren't necessarily about medical malpractice, but were really building that grassroots sort of connection.
I see. So you're there until 2010, and is this when you take over Sue's firm?
No, that's when I leave to run a trial lawyer's campaign for Attorney General, Rob Tilley.
Okay, yes, Rob. So tell me about that campaign. So this is your first statewide campaign.
This is my first statewide campaign that I was asked to be the campaign manager on.
And he was out of Cobb County?
Cobb County.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, he's a trial lawyer, champion member. His, interestingly, his wife, Heather Tilley, was the press secretary for Governor Perdue. He was running as a Democrat, both big UGA folks. Amazing family. He had just had these beautiful twins, and they were very early. And so he had really sort of been through sort of a, medical emergency, and had been through some family stuff, but they were doing really well. And he was ready for his next step. It was 2010. If I had probably known then what I know now, I knew that it was an upward battle of ginormous proportions. But he really felt very passionately about the Attorney General role, felt that it had been underutilized. Of course, Thurbert Baker was gone.
Right.
And for so long, there was just a slate of candidates that got voted in. There was this idea that maybe the voters didn't know what these different positions actually did, too. So it was an opportunity to talk about what the Attorney General's office could be. It could be a consumer protection agency. It could be, all of these different things. And I loved Rob. I loved Heather. I loved the family. And so I was really excited. So we were a 3-person shop, me, David Fuentes, and Emily Orrock now, but Emily Thomas back then. And I'll never forget, because as a state legislator, you can't raise money while you're sitting in session. And it was the longest legislative session in the history of Georgia. I think it went to April 28th, and the primary was in May. Ooh. So we had 3 weeks or something like that to raise money to be able to spend it, because he couldn't actually take it in as a person. And we were running against Ken Hodges in the primary, and we had a TV firm and a very hard-hitting TV ad against Ken Hodges and the role that he played in a prosecutorial role where a man was actually killed by police. And it was very powerful. It was my first time working like one-on-one with like the big national, like these were the guys, you know, they're still around, to do these ads. And they just had us convinced, you know, don't worry, we got it wrapped up. This is all we need. This ad, we're going to play it. It's great. We're going to get through it. We'll raise the money. We got walloped in the primary. Absolutely walloped. You know, and Ken Hodges did organizing. They were out there working in the counties and working with people, and we really didn't. We didn't have that kind of team. And that was such a big lesson for me to learn on the power of organizing too. That was my first real public loss where I was tied to it.
Sure.
And, you know, I still to this day think you learn more from when you lose than when you win. And I always tell people when I'm lucky enough to like teach Audrey's class at UJA or something, I remind everyone that it's a 50-50 shot. Like you're not only going to get into this business to win, so you better be ready to lose because it will happen. But yeah, it doesn't make it any easier.
Sure. So you stow those lessons learned away and move back into lobbying at the Gold Dome.
So Sue retired, and so I took over several of the clients in her practice. And then I also, so while I did that in the spring, I also joined Mad Dog Mail, which is a direct mail firm. John Anderson was actually the director of the party in 2002. He was our mail guy on the Attorney General's race. And I came on as senior vice president and did races across the country. So worked, you know, in a lot of state races and caucuses, mail is your main point of communication, not TV or radio. And so was sort of the general consultant and mail director for, you know, the really competitive. I think the House caucus in North Carolina, the Senate caucus in Nevada, a bunch of races in between. In fact, the governor of Kansas, Laura Kelly, I was able to work on her Senate mail that year. So it's interesting. Like I'll see people pop up in other places and be like, oh yeah, I did their mail. I did, the next year I did Andre Dickens. He's now the mayor of Atlanta on his first race. So that was a great way to get to know.
You'll be reminding him of that.
I just want to congratulate him. Yeah.
So this question it's been in my mind for a while. Steel cut strategies, is that an allusion to oats?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
It had to be.
Yeah.
It had to. Why?
I don't know, actually.
Okay.
You know, I was going to start that firm with two other people who ended up not joining in just for one of my best friends, Danny Orrock, Nan Orrock's son. He ended up moving up to Virginia. And one of the women that I was going to work with, that we'd worked on choice stuff quite a bit, actually went on to become a director of a women's health clinic. So it was just me, but you know, we did a lot of spitballing, a lot of coming up with names. It was kind of like grits a little bit, but we just liked the idea of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So you do direct mail for a while. You have your shop.
Yep.
Tell me about how you come back to the Democratic Party of Georgia.
So in 2010, after Rob lost, I also took contracts in Georgia. So I took a contract with Georgia Windless to help on a couple races that November.
And that's Melita Easter's organization?
It is now, yep. Amy
now.
Morton was the chair of it then.
That's right.
So I worked closely with Amy Morton. And we did some interesting tests with some mail and the runoff elections for some appellate judges. We also, I worked... Well, with Jason, I don't know if it was through the conservation voters. I can't recall now, but I worked on a ballot initiative that year, a statewide ballot initiative. We were ballot initiative number 5 that allowed people to install sort of environmentally friendly like solar or different powers and then be able to pay for it over time with the savings. And that was the year that the hospital tax was on the ballot, and everybody was talking about that. And so we were, scrambling to get oxygen. But while that lost, and I think everything else lost, we actually won that year. So that was the first ballot initiative statewide that I worked on, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. It was fun to work for myself. It was always kind of like which contract is next, moving from thing to thing.
Sure.
And at that time, Georgia was still red. It was much more conservative there, which means too that there's not as much money flowing in to places to hire consultants and contractors. So, I was really glad that I had both the lobbying and the direct mail thing too, because it would have been a little more lean. I think somebody who came in and worked in progressive causes now would have the opportunity to have many more contracts than I did back then. But
so you worked on those. Tell me how you found out about the executive director position.
Yes.
For the party. So this is 2013.
So this is 2013, December 2013. It was mid-December. So at that point, and the win list, of course, was in the party headquarters in 2010 or 12 or whenever I did those.
And this is under Mike Burlon.
Yeah.
That they would have. Okay.
Well, Jane Kidd at
Jane
that
Kidd
point.
would have been, through then.
And I always knew Jane. She was so great. And I just ran with people who were always at the party. So I kind of had a sense of what was going on. And of course, at this point, December 2013, Mike Burlon's in FedPen. Dubose Porter had run a race against Doug Stoner to be the chair.
Right.
And it was to fulfill an unexpired term. So it wasn't a 4-year term at that point because Burlon left early to FedPen. So Nikema Williams, our congresswoman now, of course, was the interim chair before Dubose was elected. And I got a call from Dubose and Stacey Abrams in December of 2013 that's asked me, Rebecca, we're going to try and rebuild this party. We're raising the money. We're getting ready. We're going to need to, put some hard work into it. We have some big names that are going to be coming out, that are going to be running on the ballot in 2014. And would you be interested in being the executive director? And I was 6.5 months pregnant with my first child. And I was getting ready to go into session. I was nervous about session because I was due on April 1st. And I was like, if session goes late, and being pregnant on those marble floors too. Although I would have loved it because I was representing Feminist Women's Health Center, because people just, have these ideas that are just inconceivable about women lobbyists that work for the health clinics. But also Stacey and Dubose. And they're two people that I just love more than anything. And I trust them and I trust their vision and I think they're brilliant. And I was flattered that they asked me and I said, yeah, I would. And I remember driving up to Michigan to see my parents for Christmas, pulling over in Indiana when I got the call with the official offer. So it was right before Christmas. And I said yes, and I canceled my clients and helped them find new lobbyists for the session. And then I started at the Democratic Party on January 6th, 2014. There were 2 employees, Michael Smith, who had held down who is now the comms director for Mayor Bottoms, who had held down the joint kind of single-handedly, and Jeff Toddy, who's still there too, who's the vote builder guy who was running the grassroots canvassing effort. The lights were barely staying on. The bills were kind of lining up. Everything was chaotic. I think they had done a magazine feature that said like sort of the most dysfunctional parties in the United States on both sides. And Georgia made the list. And I was like, all right, let's do this. And so...
Only way to go is up.
Only way to go is up. And, we did. By the end of it, we had a $25 million cycle with 150 employees and probably one of the most successful coordinated campaigns that I know of in modern history.
So you mentioned Dubose and Stacey Abrams, who was House Minority Leader at the time. Big fans of yours. Not everybody was thrilled with your selection as executive director.
There was only really one person who I think wasn't, but yes.
Tell me about that.
So, because I'd been knocking around Georgia for a while now, since 2002, and, had positions in progressive ways and also with the trial lawyers, people knew me pretty well, and
Sure.
I think they were generally happy. Senator Vincent Fort was not happy at all. He went to the press and he created a big thing about it. And the fact of the matter is that he didn't think that we should have a white executive director and a white chair. And so, that makes sense. It's a rapidly changing demography, Georgia, and representation matters. At the end of the day, his pushback wasn't enough to make the executive committee. I think I was approved unanimously by the executive committee of the Democratic Party, and I had Stacey and Dubos's support. I think that there was some animosity about Dubos being the chair too, and moving in a direction that was more inclusive. So I think it's part of the growing struggles that we have in Georgia, and it's something that we have to take seriously. I mean, not all of Vincent Fort's comments were needed to be taken seriously, and at the end of the day, he pulled me aside and tried to let me know that it wasn't personal and we were still friends. But yeah, it was a somewhat difficult time.
Sure. Comes with the territory sometimes,
yep, absolutely.
I suppose. So you mentioned how the sort of disarray that the party organization was in. How did you and Dubose and others set about trying to right the ship? I assume financially first, just to keep a headquarters and to keep a staff and to keep the lights on. How did you go about that?
We hired a couple of other people. We hired a finance person. We hired a county affairs director. Michael Smith became our comms director, and there was me. So there was just the four of us there for a minute, and then we, continued to grow. The first thing we had to do was get our own house in order. When we went to the Democratic Party had gotten moved to this like really kind of funky warehouse space over on the west side, and it was terrible. It was awful space. I had been pregnant, so of course I had my baby on April 2nd, the day after my due date, and I love that too. Just for time and place for this, I would be remiss to not mention. I remember calling my mom and saying, I got this new job, like a pretty high-profile job, 6.5 months pregnant, and she teared up, and she was just like, honey, when I was your age, women got fired. They didn't get hired. And that's always really stuck with me. And I think it has stuck with me in the way that I manage my own organizations and allow family to be such an important part of them. But I also remember, I remember being, in this terrible office where the walls didn't go all the way up to the ceiling. And so you could never have a private conversation, and everything echoed, and everything was insane. And I remember Jason Carter in Dubos's office meeting with him, and I remember pumping in the office next door, and just the wah-wah of the pump reverberating through the walls while Jason Carter is meeting with Dubose and thinking, okay, I guess I've made it, but God, I couldn't wait to get out of that office, and probably a lot of that. So one of the first things we did is end that lease, and we moved to the IVEW building.
Right.
And we started paying our money to our friends in labor, and finding a home that we could grow in. We built out, the fourth floor. We designed it in a way that could handle our growth. We moved the House Caucus office over there. So it was just more functioning. It was a place that had an auditorium. It was a place for gathering. It wasn't this weird warehouse where you couldn't have more than 3 cars. I mean, everything about that place was just wrong, but apparently it looked cool. Also had a private nursing room, which was delightful, and as every new mother should. So that was really great. The next thing we did when we were moving was I found this huge box, and it was all the documents from county committees that were supposed to have been certified. Because the county committees have to turn in documents per state law to the state party every year to be certified to ensure that they can operate as a county committee. It was a mess. There were no files. They were thrown into a box. County committees were furious because they felt like, probably rightfully so, that they were forced to jump through all these hoops that really didn't mean anything. So we really turned in. That was a 2-year project where we went through the history of every county party, organized it all, made PDFs of it, put it up on the cloud, so that it just didn't exist in these ways, culled some of the actual files so they were just still more modern. We had a new, on the executive committee, a new vice chair for county affairs, Sarah Todd, out of Newton County. She'd been a longtime party chair. And she and I, for a long time, before we brought on Melva Steps as our county affairs person, went through county by county, called each one of them, talked about what was needed, talked about what wasn't needed, but finally took certification seriously and even changed the bylaws in some ways to make them more accommodating to the county committee, because we wanted them to feel like they were actually a part of the party. And that was hard work. 159 counties, not all of them have them. Some of them still so mad at the state party for so many reasons, some of them not doing what they were supposed to do, and having to go in and teach them. We created, we called it the Blue Peach, maybe? Road Show, the Georgia Road Show. And we would go county to county and we would train people on how to hold elections for your chairs and your secretaries and your treasurers, how to do all of the basic stuff. It's so
astounding for a party that had been in control of the state for so long that it really speaks to the fact that the party never had to do this stuff. The Republican Party of Georgia had been doing this in the 80s and 90s, and now here you were in 2014, 15, doing this all. Like, you weren't really joking about rebuilding the party from the ground up.
It was from the absolute ground up. And I think back to the lessons I learned at the Capitol of like knowing the institution before it's just all like the sound bites of why you should vote this way or this way. I felt the same way about the party too. Like we had to have a message, but we had to get our own house in order. We had to build up an executive committee that the state trusted and that took up important things and were transparent in their processes. We had to start holding state committee hearings again that were open to the public, that people actually felt like they just weren't just like a social club, that we actually did the business of moving the party forward. In the party, too, remember in 2008 and 2012, Obama operated outside of the party structure.
Through OFA.
They did OFA. So whereas there had been some real big successes.
So that's Organizing for America.
That's right.
Which had been Obama for America. So it was the campaign apparatus turned into
OFA.
An organizing apparatus.
That's right.
Okay.
And I think what's important about that is that when you do have large successes like that, usually that's instilled in the party, but the party sort of missed out on that some. And so, there was data cleanup to do. There was outdated software, from like NGP and other things that needed just to be revived. And it's a process too, because when you work at the party, everyone who's a Democrat thinks that they're your boss. So it wasn't always the easiest thing. Sometimes it felt like pushing, an anvil up a mountain. But I think we got our house cleaned up. We got ready so that we had an infrastructure built that could withstand sort of the gravity and the gravitas of a large-scale effort that we began to see and that we began to build.
So I guess 2014 was the first real test at the ballot box. So you had mentioned earlier, you had big names lined up for 2014.
Sure did.
Michelle Nunn, Jason Carter,
yep.
Two legacy Democratic candidates.
That's right.
Tell me about that process of the state party, you, and working with those campaigns that had big names, some national support as well.
I think it was a learning process for a lot of folks because we were still in the rebuild phase, for sure.
Oh, sure.
And, we'd always had good candidates. I mean, Dubose was candidate for governor and stuff. But for the legacy candidates, for the daughter of Sam Nunn, who is legendary and was legendary on both sides of the aisles for so long, and for, in her own right, the head of CARE International and just an extraordinary woman. And then Jason Carter, of course, grandson of the president, to come on. That was showing that the Democrats were real. They were back. Like, they were willing to put themselves out there because they saw this path forward. And I think 2014 was a real pivotal moment for us in Georgia, and started to test what we were able to do. They each sort of had their own coordinated campaigns, as many coordinated campaigns are run, because the DS is over here and the DGA is over here, and then the party is over here. At the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways to look at the party. There's a couple different roles the party can play during a coordinated campaign. They can be like sort of the back of the house, they can be the front of the house, or they can just be like the checkbook kind of.
Define those for us. What would back of the house, front of the house? And I think checkbook is pretty self-explanatory. But
Yeah, sometimes you could just be like the apparatus, because it's a completely legal apparatus. The party is 100% allowed to coordinate with candidates.
Right.
And, the money comes in different. I could go way into the weeds of the split with Fed and state and all of this, but basically a party as an entity is able to raise unlimited state funds, limited federal funds, and is able to expend them accordingly to state law and the FCC, which is different from candidates. Candidates have campaign contribution limits, and so there's ways that the candidates can encourage donations to be made to the party, so that the party then, in their efforts, has to benefit the ticket as a whole. So, you can have the players on the campaigns that are part of the coordinated campaign call all the shots and just have the party be the checkbook, the writer. You can have the party sitting at the table calling all the shots for everybody, or you can kind of be sort of a mix, where you work together. And I think, in 2014 and 2016, we were much more of just like the infrastructure. We were much more of the candidates definitely called the shots and in coordination with one another. There were other people that were on the ballot too that weren't as big of fundraisers. We have some pretty prolific slates of candidates that are coming up, and not everyone had the same power or the same fundraising power as, say, Michelle Nunn or Jason Carter. So, the party also is in charge of helping them do what they can do. I would say that 2014 was a very typical coordinated campaign process. I think that both Michelle and Jason moved the needle. And I think they sort of invited everybody back to come believe in the party again, which I think is really important. When you had a former chair in FedPen and you were silent and you were in disarray, they invited people to believe again and to roll up their sleeves and to really get to work.
That they were actually credible candidates as opposed to also rans, I suppose.
Right.
So one thing I found interesting after 2014 is in 2015 the DPG drops the Jefferson Jackson name.
Yeah, that was fun. Jefferson Jackson dinners, that's synonymous with Democratic Party. Yeah.
What was behind that? I think I know the answer, but what was behind that decision?
Oh, I think, so one, I don't want to discredit a bunch of people throughout the state, including county commissioners and like a lot of progressive people just being like, that's archaic, they're racist. But I just personally, what I remember is sitting with Dubose, as we did, and talking about it and being like, yeah, we should get rid of that because they were racist as all get out. And our dinners should not be named after that. And so we came up with something where we had people submit for what to call it. And everybody wanted to call it Lewis or Carter or Young. All of the giants, the greats. And I think it was Dubose who was like, we're just going to call it the state dinner this year. And we'll get that figured out later. But we're going to call it the state dinner. And I think it's still called the state dinner today. I don't think they've changed it.
One of those permanent temporary names.
Yeah. But we were really proud. It was small, but it was symbolic.
Sure.
And it was showing that the party was starting to mature.
Mm-hmm. So, 2016, there was some talk that Hillary Clinton and her campaign were going to play in Georgia, somewhat, I suppose. But the most high-profile state race would have been against Senator Isaacson and Jim Barksdale. What happened with that campaign? And did the state party have anything to do with that campaign, or was it focusing more on state legislative races, presidential race?
Wow, I haven't thought about that in a long time. So let me first say that what was interesting about the presidential races was a pretty small infusion of cash, but we were able to talk big about it. I think I got my first live hits on CNN and on Fox News with that. And what was fun about that is that I had a lot of friends up in, that were working on Hillary's campaign. And I think that that's when I was elected vice president of the ASDED too, the National Association of Executive Directors. And so I did a lot of training other EDs around the country.
Basically
and
to do what you were trying to do or were doing
exactly
there in Georgia.
And so there was some trust in the Georgia party, I think, at that point. And so the Clinton campaign did invest. It was small, it was 6 figures, but it was small. And the presidential campaign was sort of run out of our office. Tracy Lewis came down. She had been here with the DSCC and Michelle Nunn's campaign. I love Tracy. And she became the state director for Hillary. And so that was really great. And the party, it doesn't sound like much now, but given where we were, the party itself raised over $1 million. I think I had a 1.4 million organizing program that year. And I think only 100,000 of it came from the Clinton campaign. So, we were starting to take steps that really started to make a difference, and we were having staff, and we were opening offices and putting people places.
Not to cut you off, but where was the money coming from? Like small dollar donors?
Yep.
Large donors, all the above?
One thing I remember when I started the job, talked about cleaning house. In order to give online, you had to fill out like a 2-page form that was so archaic to give money.
The donor had to fill out that form?
So we switched to Act Blue. It was like these little changes where we were just so behind.
Entire
in the
dissertations
times.
could be written about Act Blue. Political scientists everywhere.
But the great thing about it is, people actually started giving. Our online donations started going up. We had more credibility. We were building our on the ground door knocking apparatus, which to this day I believe is doing really great. We had Stacy. Stacy wasn't just the House Minority Leader at this point. She was the advocate for the party infrastructure. Like, she was for building it. She knew where it needed to be for her to run. And so there was belief in that too, but we started doing more with donors. We, had more successful dinners, like the big state dinner. We had better speakers. We were still, and everyone always teases me for being cheap and being a miser, but we didn't spend wildly either. There was lots of stories before where, like under the former administration, like a bunch of money would be spent on swag or billboards or this or that. We were penny pinchers, and we spent it where it really counted. And I think that helped us quite a bit. And then, Jim Barksdale was an interesting candidate. I think he had the potential to really help fund his own campaign. I honestly can't remember, so I apologize for not remembering the ins and outs of it. But, by the end of it, it wasn't a campaign that anyone had really bought into. It wasn't on the top tier for the national way.
Sure.
And he was a little bit of a untraditional.
Well, it certainly would have been an uphill campaign against Senator Isaacson in a presidential year.
Yep.
So, not surprising, as you say.
Yeah.
So, your party ED. So you're technically neutral in all competitive primaries campaigns.
Yeah, by the bylaws at the state party. Yep.
So going into 2018, what's your perspective on what the Democratic Party is going to do, what Stacey Abrams is going to do, what Stacey Evans is going to do, and how did you prepare as a party for that cycle?
So it's a great question. Well, I think, I actually think too that 17 was a cycle in itself, and I just throw that out because of Ossoff's race.
Oh yeah, the
2 races,
the sixth, and the runoff,
the 6th congressional, which ended up being the most expensive congressional
races
in history.
$34 million, something. I think he spent $34 million. I'm not sure how much Karen Handel.
Oh yeah, I mean it was
an
insane amount of money, and he did an insane amount of fundraising. But I just bring that up because one, it never felt like we got a break because 16 was brutal, and if you worked at the Democratic Party, your job was to watch everything in detail with what Trump was doing in those first, days of office.
Did you expect Hillary to win?
Yes.
What was your reaction when President Trump won?
I was stunned. I was excited. She got closer than I think a lot of people thought she would in Georgia. So for whatever that's worth, there was still that. But I remember being at the hotel and going up to Michael and John, our finance director, and Michael. And I just remember I got a call from people at the DNC. I was getting text messages that was just because at that point there were still votes out, and they were just like, Rebecca, how many votes? Are you going to be able to? And I remember getting texts about it being over in Michigan and Wisconsin from my colleagues before it was on the news. And I remember walking up to John and just saying, it's over. And I don't even think, there were tears shed. I don't think I did at this point. I went upstairs to the hotel room where my husband and baby were and just sat and watched the TV. And I think I was numb, like a lot of people were. There was a lot of fear. We had lived through so much in 2016 too. This was the year of WikiLeaks. This is the year of the hacks. These are where my emails from the Democratic Party were on a website of WikiLeaks, because everybody's were if you communicated with the DNC, and we couldn't go check to because you can't go on to the website or they'll get into everything. And so not that I would have worried, because I'd never had anything that I would have cared about, but and we had been through the Bernie and the Hillary thing. And as a state party, that was actually a very difficult place to be, because there was a lot of people that felt like the establishment was against a particular candidate when we went out of our way to not be. So there was just a lot of animosity that we were accepting for months. And so, yeah, it was stunning and it was awful. And I think one of the things that I'll remember the most is on Inauguration Day in January of 2017, me and John and Michael and some other people on staff ordered Woody's cheesesteaks using DoorDash. It was brand new at that point, and chocolate malts. And we were going to watch the inauguration because we had to. And I just remember the DoorDash delivery person could not believe they were delivering cheesesteaks to the Democratic Party on Inauguration Day. And I was crying as they were delivering the cheesesteaks. I'm so sorry. Today is awful. I can't believe I'm here with y'all. And it was just surreal. And the months after it were surreal as well. And it was hard. It was hard emotionally and spiritually for people who were really invested. Personally, I was really invested. I really believed in having a woman president for the first time. And that was something I was really excited about happening. But anyhow, so it brings us to 2017. I'm so thankful to John Ossoff, and I'm so thankful for 2017 in so many ways. John gave people something to believe in again when a lot of people were really grasping with fear of the unknown and feeling probably more alienated than they ever had from somebody who was of their opposite party. And here was this young man, totally bright, completely fascinating on the stump and, just very unexpected in so many ways. Captured the attention of America in the 6th District of Georgia, where Isaacson and,
Tom Price
and Newt Gingrich and, to see this sort of transformation made everybody believe again. And you remember he came so close to winning the thing outright. And there were all those other candidates. And you asked me about not getting involved in a primary. But I'll tell you
that was pretty tough.
There was a lot of discussion at the party about getting rid of that from our bylaws after that and having the party play in a primary because it had been so close. And there are a lot of state parties in the nation where they do get involved in the primary. I think in Minnesota, you don't even get access to the voter file unless you're the state party endorsed candidate. Now, there's pros and cons to both.
Oh, sure.
And I don't think we ever advocated for going the full way that we would turn into Minnesota, where we would get involved in every race. But I think there was a emergency trigger to do so should it happen. And that was a really good example of why. We would have loved to have run a coordinated campaign with Jon Ossoff in that first race. You know, I mean, he did phenomenal work. We weren't able to. We did get into the runoff, and it was a federal runoff. It was a little bit longer. I don't remember why it feels longer. Does it feel longer because of my memory or because there was actually more time elapsing?
It was
because
longer. I remember
because they were both special elections. So.
I remember the original special it had to have been April.
Yeah. And then it was June.
Because I was following the race on the car. We were going back to Illinois for something. I think my grandmother had passed away. And that's why we were going. She was 92, lived a good long life. And then I think the runoff was in June. It was a very rainy June day. I remember that. I was writing my dissertation. That's why everything is like very, very stuck in my memory. So yeah, it was a long. It was,
and it felt like a long time, but it felt like enough time to build a coordinated campaign. And I think that was, I really liked Jon Ossoff's campaign manager, and I remember calling the D trip. And at this point, you know, I was the vice president of the ASDD. I was really active with the ASDC. I think people started to know me around the country too. So when I called the D trip, I think I was able to sort of work out how we would work together in a way that somebody greener in my position maybe wouldn't have been able to. And it was just like, yeah, of course we'll do that. Of course we'll do the mail. Of course we'll do this. How can we make it easier? You know, do we need to? And I really tried to show them right away that I was their partner. And we ended up having a fabulous working relationship. The state party called no shots in Jon Ossoff's race, and that's completely okay. Like, that's a really good example of a back of the house. We didn't need to. They had a $33 million or however many it was campaign. He had amazing people on the ground. He was one of the only races happening in the nation, so the best of the best could all be there. And the state party got to play the state party role and got to shine in just executing cleanly, on time, with ease, ensuring all FCC things were followed. Like, it was really great. And I think it showed a lot of people how good a coordinated campaign can work and why all three sort of perspectives have a time and place.
Sure.
So I just say that because I think that brings us to 2018, to the coordinated campaign and getting ready for it.
Right.
We could not do anything in the primary, for sure. I had a gut, feeling who would win. I was good friends with both Stacey's before the 2018 race. You know, Stacey Evans and I had worked very closely, particularly on choice legislation. She and I fought the 20-week ban quite a bit. We were the ones who, it's still kind of famous because the speaker banned it after this, but we were the ones who got together and had her film her descent from the well, because she was actually having her baby the day that the bill came up on the House floor. And it was kind of a big deal that she was like, I can't be with you because I'm having my baby and this is why you are all wrong. And after that, the speaker banned and said that people couldn't send those videos anymore. So anyhow, we'd had these long relationships. It was very clear to me soon in how the primary was going to turn out.
Right.
It was not very clear to everybody. And I think it was, there was a lot of old school and new school politics and campaigning that were thrown in. At the end of the day, I think we were all worried that it could somehow fracture the party or break the party. It did not, I mean, I think one of the coolest things, we had our state dinner the week after the primary, because we wanted to coalesce against who our candidate would be, or around our candidate. And I just remember Stacey Evans standing up and getting a round of applause from a standing ovation, from everybody that was in the room, which is such a class act, right? Not everybody would do that when the person that just beat you in the primary was going to be the featured speaker at the state party to kick off the coordinated campaign. And she was so gracious, and she endorsed Stacey Abrams, So I think there was just like a lot of goodness that happened around that time.
Just to take a step back, you had talked about 2017 and how important it was. Much has been said, much has been written about the influx of cash into Democratic organizations following President Trump's election. Did you see that in Georgia in the state party, or was that
Oh, yeah.
flowing to candidates primarily?
Mostly to candidates. I mean, like, the state party doesn't make any money during a coordinated campaign.
Right.
You know, like, you can take a percentage of the funds to help pay for the operations of.
Sure,
You can have
sure.
like the bookkeeper or the HR or something, but it's not like you hold back cash or something like that during a race. But people did believe in Georgia. You know, our door-to-door canvassing operation, people, you know, we'd go to Athens, we'd go to places, you know, where people really did believe in the party. I think our online giving grew exponentially. He was a uniter, Donald Trump was, in a lot of ways, for people to join the resistance. You know, this is when the Women's March was happening. This was the Muslim ban, when John Lewis shows up at the airport and is sitting there in protest. I mean, there was a lot that happened in Georgia that was a reflection of dissent from Trump's early policies that kept us on the map.
Right. Okay, so back to 2018. What's the conventional wisdom of who you'll face in the Republican or on the Republican side? Did you think much about it, or were you just focused on?
I think, you know, when Kemp started with those ads is when I knew that I thought it would be Kemp.
So you thought those ads would play,
Yeah,
and
totally.
obviously they did play with
Yeah.
the Republican electorate.
Yep. And then, gosh, I haven't thought about that forever, because there was the Casey Cagle and what was the other guy's name? Roy?
No, there were. It was Casey Cagle, Brian Kemp, Hunter Hill, Lindsey Tippins. No. Clay.
Yeah.
Clay Tippins, not Lindsey.
That's right.
Lindsey's the legislator.
It was the senator.
And then
that's who
Mike
it was,
Williams,
who
I
sort of
think.
pulled the rug on.
The recording, the secret
Yeah.
recording. That was the Tippins tape.
Yep. No, I think that I anticipated after that for it to be Kemp. Pretty early on. That's who we thought it would be.
All right. So, look, moving forward into the 2018 general election, how is 2018 different from 2014?
Yeah. So
That's a big question, I know.
yeah. Well, every coordinated campaign in every cycle is so different, right? Because it's not just about the party's relationship with a candidate. It's also about the party's relationship with itself and its county committees. It's about the relationship of what's going on in the outer world. So in 2014, you had 159 county committees who had been felt completely, abandoned by their state party.
Right.
You had two high-profile candidates who came in with big name people, and you didn't have this Trump thing going on in the world, So you had an Obama presidency. It was just different. So then you move into 2018 and you actually have county committees in the party moving in as one. So you have a much stronger infrastructure. You have a strong House and Senate caucus. You have, a really exciting candidate on the ballot. You have for governor, and then you also have a uniter after what just happened after 2016. So I think that there's always a confluence of events that kind of come together to bring everyone together. But so it's hard. It's hard. I guess what I'm trying to say is to compare one or the other. I think what is unique is the party wasn't a strong entity in 2014. We were brand new,
Right.
But the party was strong in 2016, and we were kind of known nationwide by our peers of how a rebuild can happen and how a rebirth can happen. And so we had more respect as an institution, and we had a front row seat at the table with the coordinated campaign. And we had a slate of other candidates too who, regardless of their, ability to fundraise, or, if they were to have fancy consultants or not, they had a top of the ticket that truly felt like everyone would be stronger together. And so
Right.
also invested in the other candidates. I think Stacey broke a lot of norms the way that she ran her campaign. Nobody expects a top of the ticket to do that.
How do you mean? Oh, you're talking about investing in other
Yeah,
campaigns.
you know, a coordinated campaign can sometimes be a real tricky situation where it's the idea of everyone sits at the table and makes these joint decisions. But it's very hard for a candidate, if they're going to raise millions and millions of dollars, to not get it the way that they want it to be. And that can often create friction. And it's part of the beast as a coordinated campaign. And so I think, you know, Stacey just always has had a little bit of a longer term view. There was a greater transparency than I had seen from other candidates with the party and with other candidates, and also, you know, not every federal or state gubernatorial candidate would invite other candidates down the ballot to come on the stump with them. You know, I mean, there was just a different mentality of building it together.
Oh, I remember one thing that kept popping up in the news was, you're talking about breaking norms for a candidate, was Stacey Abrams' campaign, their incredible spend rate early on.
Oh, yeah.
Used to be, you know, hoard the cash,
put it on TV,
bomb through TV, which takes you back to your Rob Tilley
takes
campaign.
me back to exactly what I learned.
Right. So tell me about that strategy as opposed to the older strategies, which is, again, carpet bombing with radio and TV ads.
I remember friends and acquaintances talking so much trash about this spend rate and how can they be blowing through all this cash and building this and they're wasting it. You got to wait and put it on TV at the very end. That is right there. So demonstrates a newer, bolder, more strategic, more in touch with the voters way of running a campaign. I completely, you know, I think I started in 2010, but I don't believe in saving all your money and putting it on TV at the very end. And I think, you know, what was so interesting about Stacey is that she also brought data to the table in a way other campaigns hadn't. You know, how many unregistered voters are there? How many registered voters are infrequent voters? Where are they? She had from the very beginning this installation of, sure, I'm the candidate, but the campaign is not about me. It's about y'all. And if y'all aren't voting because you don't think the government's going to give you anything anyhow, because what has it ever done for you? And you know, then I want to have a conversation with you because I want to lay out there for you. Actually, it can do this and this and this and this if we work together. If we work together, we can expand Medicaid. You know, if we work together, we can actually invest in our schools. If we work together, we can change criminal justice, you know, system, those sorts of things. And having real conversations, you know, Stacey was going to places like Sylvester, Georgia, and, you know, Camilla, and, you know, places that weren't the packed houses in Macon or Savannah or Columbus. Like, she was going out there to give people a chance to believe again and to invite them to participate with her and to, you know, really authentically show them that it was more than just talk, that it wasn't just being extractive. You know, I'm not just coming here to get your vote so that you never hear from me again. And to prove it, I'm going to hire an organizer who lives 4 doors down from you to really help build this movement here, because we can do more in Sylvester, Georgia. And that's where that burn rate came from. You know, that was them traveling to all these parts of the state and hiring organizers and building a movement in places that aren't in the Atlanta media market.
Sure.
You know, and that aren't in these other places. And if they are, it's all the candidates that are kind of talking about the same thing anyhow. I mean, like, after a while, unless you're pulling a gun on a teenager in an ad, a lot of ads start to look the same.
I wonder where that was going for a second.
But I think that's what she did so well, and it's why she won 157 out of 159 counties. Nobody would have expected that. I think, like, a typical political pundit would have made the mistake of saying Stacey's a black candidate and will win in black counties, and Evans will win in white counties, and there'll be this and this and this. Stacey won the white voters. Stacey won the black voters. Stacey won, you know, and I think it's because she ran a different type of campaign.
So, and that carries over, I assume, into the general election. That same, if I'm remembering correctly, the general election campaign, of course, you're at headquarters, you're not with the campaign. You know,
but I had 150 employees that were out there.
Right.
Yep.
So I think the general election kicked off in Albany I think, right,
I think
the general election, or it was somewhere down
Dublin.
south. It may have been.
I think it was
may have
Dublin.
been. It was middle South Georgia.
Yep.
I know it was south of, well, it would have been south of the fault
No,
line.
Dubose is there, but yeah, imagine. It might have been Albany. I think there was a tour, but then they did go to Dublin.
Sure.
Yeah, there. But yes, absolutely. She's never kicked something off in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
So, this is a very expensive campaign,
Mm-hmm.
hotly contested campaign. Barack Obama comes in.
Oh God, that was
Oprah
such a great
Winfrey
night.
comes in.
That was a great night too.
I mean, you. I'm sure you remember all the celebrities and outside folks.
I never
who
went to
came.
any of them,
Well,
but
and the President Trump comes in to Macon and everything. So this is a nationalized race, for a large part.
in a lot of ways.
So, one of the key moments of the campaign comes in that last weekend. Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who's the gubernatorial nominee for the Republican Party, accuses the state Democratic Party, of which you're the day-to-day head, of hacking the state's voter system.
That's right.
How did you find out, and what were those next, 24, 48 hours like?
Terrible. I still think what that campaign did was criminal. So to put it in time and place, too, early vote had been happening, for the 3 weeks.
Sure.
And the state party had, what we started was as a very normal voter protection effort, just like we'd had in 14, just like we'd had in 16. This is something that's done where you have the boiler room and you have the people taking calls if there's issues. We just had more and more issues during early vote. Things were coming up that were strange. I don't remember, poll books were being lost and left in cars at grocery stores. There was, crazy lines, but there was just a lot happening, and we were having to ramp up our voter protection effort. So at this point, we were getting higher number of calls than we ever had before. We were seeing suppressive tactics. We were seeing police officers outside of polling locations with lights. There had been talking about, there was this was, I think, the first year that we were outside of the consent decree, or maybe it was the last year of, but there was a lot of talk from the president about people coming down to protect the polls.
The consent decree being the one, I think, from New Jersey.
Yeah, between the DNC and the RNC. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Wow.
That either ended that year or it ended in 2019. I can't recall. But all of that to say is we were getting an exceptional number of calls into our voter protection hotline all over the place. A lot of issues with people voting by mail, a lot of people of accusing things. And, this is when also everybody was talking about the machines being hacked and that Russian diplomat being at Kennesaw State. And, there was all that stuff that was happening. So it was Sunday morning before the campaign. Trump was supposed to be in Macon that day, I think, and it had been fall back. So I had this extra hour of sleep, which I loved because I had another baby during the coordinated campaign in 2018. And so my little baby Whit was, well, goodness, that was the end of October. He was born in June, 3-4 months old. And I was feeding the baby in bed in my pajamas. And I just remember my phone blowing up. I don't even remember who it was. And it was just like, did you see this thing from Bluestein? It might have even been Greg Bluestein. I should ask him about this. I think maybe he texted me, do you have any comment on this or something? I was like, what in the what? And I'm immediately just stunned with what I read, that the Secretary of State was accusing the Democratic Party of Georgia of hacking into the voter database on the Secretary of State's website. I was like, what is going on? And there's all these words like Homeland Security, and this is getting reported up, and I'm just like, whoa. And so I just remember calling, of course, Dubose, and then calling Dave Worley, who is on the Board of Elections. He's the Democratic appointee. And I remember he must have known it was important because he was on his way into church. It was Sunday morning, and he took my call. And I remember getting dressed, and I remember it ratcheting up very quickly. And I remember the fear ratcheting up very quickly. I remember having to get a lawyer very quickly to figure out what kind of maneuvering was going on, what was going to happen to the party. I mean, there were some people that were saying, like, Trump is on his way here. If this is like a homeland security, this is this new America that we're living in. It's this Trump's America. Are they going to come and confiscate all the computers in the Democratic Party's office? Is this absolute egregious allegation? Like, am I going, is this dangerous for me? I remember leaving my children with my husband that day saying, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know if I'm safe. I don't know if the party is safe. And like hugging my kids and leaving. And it was awful. And I went to campaign headquarters, and I ended up going, and Dubose and me and some lawyers, and we sat at Democratic Party headquarters all day. And I told everyone, I said, don't come into headquarters today, because I didn't know what would happen. We'd already had security threats. We've already had to have security posted outside. I mean, the stuff that we sometimes had to do to keep everybody safe was ridiculous. And but we told everybody in the field, keep going, keep working. This is 3 days before the election, so that never interrupted that. But at the end of the day, what had happened is somebody had found out that the Secretary of State's website was completely open. I don't know how it all works, because I couldn't hack a tin can, but you could just like put something, there was some arrow in the browser bar or something, that if you did something, a little box would appear on the side of the Secretary of State's website where they had failed to secure it, and every single voter and their social security number and everything was right there. I mean, they had absolutely failed to secure the voter file on their own state website. Like, massive fail. So what happens when they found out that they were a complete failure at their job? They accused us of like a federal crime and brought in Homeland Security and all of this. So what had happened is a general techie do-gooder, I don't know, somebody.
White hat.
Yeah, I don't even think it was a hacker. I think it was just somebody who was just like, I don't think I should be seeing this. Called the voter protection hotline and said, I think you can hack into the Secretary of State's website, and took a screenshot. And one of the volunteers on the voter protection hotline did exactly what they should do, because remember, we were getting calls that were kind of wacky all over the place, and sent it to two cybersecurity masters, I don't know, whatever they are, cybersecurity experts at Georgia Tech that were part of this, like, they were too trusted. I think they were part of like the governors himself, like look into everything that happened with Russian hacking and all this stuff, and said, hey, this just came in. Is this legit? Because nobody at the party was going to go click on that or do whatever. Who knows what that was, And so, no, mind you, the call came in late Saturday night.
Okay.
So in the middle of the night, at like apparently 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, some online hacky cyber magazine reported how insecure the Secretary of State's website was and what they were able to do. So that had already moved. The Secretary of State's office learned that they had failed and instead tried to deflect it on us on the day that the Trump was going to be there. And of course, we heard back from the experts the next day that it was actually the fault of the Secretary of State. They fixed the website by that day. Been open this whole time, this absolute whole time. And then we had to deal with the fallout from that. I think it should be criminal.
Has there been a resolution to the case? Is there a case?
I'm not entirely sure, okay. Honestly. I think that there were some suits that were filed. I'm not entirely sure what's happened with them.
Okay. So that's Sunday. The election's on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. What's your feelings going into the election on Tuesday? Where do you think?
My feelings are that Stacey's going to win. It was an extraordinary year. It's not. I'd never felt anything like it before in my 20 years. I watched somebody with a front row seat build a movement. It wasn't just a campaign. And I think that that's what's so unique about Stacey and her vision and her like authenticity. she gave people a reason to want to participate again. She gave people a reason to want to believe in again. She told people it was okay to participate. You know, she invited them to. People would ride and die for Stacey. I mean, they were just so excited. It was a symbolic win to see a black woman from the South, you know, run. She swept and everything. She was so good in the debates. She was so good. She was so good with the opposition. I just remember, you know, people would try and really stick it to her, you know, on like Stone Mountain or something. And she would just so beautifully, eloquently, and authentically say, we disagree, and here's why. But maybe we can work together. You know, I mean, like, you meet so many politicians who have a story for talking to black people who live in Atlanta and have a different story to talk to, you know, the white people who live up here and a different story to talk to here. Stacey's going to tell the same story to me, to Stephen Colbert, to the voters of Georgia, to her sister, because she's just authentically who she is. And it was such a juxtaposition to see that authenticity when you put it next to the president that who had been living with, you know, for a couple of years now. It was like snake oil, you know? And so people were, I think, had a reason to believe, and there was this movement, and I thought for sure she was going to win. I mean, I just sort of knew it. I mean, we knew it was going to be tight. It's always going to be tight. Georgia's a very split state. But I really felt like that she was going to win. And then, and then Election Day happened, and things started just to go haywire.
Explain what you mean, going haywire.
Well, you know, this is just one of those personal anecdotes, but it was one of the weirdest things. So, you know, we had a war room, you know, what they call them, for lack of a better word. I think we all tried to rename it like we did the Jefferson Jackson, but whatever, boiler room, something. And, you know, I'm probably the only nursing mom in a war room in all of the United States that year. And we stayed in the hotel the night before and then walked over, and we got there. Something was wrong with the fire alarms or the alarms in the building that morning. And so, you know, it's like 5 o'clock in the morning. It's still black outside. Like, there's no light. Everyone's tired. But like, you know, there's a feeling of when you have put absolutely every single ounce of anything you've ever owned in your life on the table, and that was expended on Sunday, and now you still have to perform on Election Day. Like, it's an unknown feeling, and there's no other way. Giving birth isn't even as hard as that. Those days of that part of the election after that, from that Sunday to Tuesday, we know. And we go in there, and something kept tripping the alarms, and so there would be like a strobe emergency light, and every 4 minutes this alarm would sound, but no one was evacuating, and it was just like, do people know we're here and are trying to get us out? Like, there was just all sorts of crazy things. But that's just like, just to set the stage, how the day started. And then we just started to hear about everything was going wrong at the polls. You know, I think our voter protection hotline logged more than 40,000 calls that day, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been 45. I'm not entirely sure. I think at the most we had ever gotten was like 9,000 calls. It was extraordinary. To say the phones were ringing off the hook, and we didn't even get to all of them. We only had so many lines. We used like Grasshopper or something, you know, that allowed so many phones to go to different lines. And we just started hearing about these problems. And I can't remember all the details of that day. I'd have to really sit back and look at it because of the exhaustion, because I'm a nursing mom at that point, you know, I mean, because so much was on the line, and also because it just seemed like there was just a series of problems. I remember when the polls were supposed to close, I want to say it was Pittsburgh, Perkerson Park, if I'm not mistaken. Don't hold me to it. But I think that was like one of the biggest sort of, there was a huge line. You know, the judge was going to let they were going to allow it to stay open a little longer.
Yeah, I remember
there was a breakdown in
over on the west side.
They sent everyone home that had been in line. And then we had to like call people and be like, no, you can still go back to vote. People start showing up with pizzas, you know, and then you end up talking to voters that were like, I can't go back. Like, I was in line to vote. I was told I'm not allowed to vote. I went home, and now I'm at my job. Or now I got to go pick up my kids. Or now I have to do this. And we're just like, what are you? And it was a super district. You know, it was like one of those really big precincts. And we started to see this happen in so many different places. We started to see where, breakdowns on college campuses. I'm just, this is just like sort of the beginning of all of this. And of course, we have a Secretary of State who's the umpire and chief player of his own game. And really, I just remember, there's this rule in Georgia where like every board of election has to like basically print out a ticker tape, of everything and like tape it on the doors, on the courthouse doors. And I just remember having to get organizers in all 159 counties because we were hearing massive disruption and issues throughout the state. It was extraordinary. Things that should have never happened did.
And so that's information that's coming in between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
And it kept coming.
Sure,
Yep.
sure. Well, right. As you said, the polls remain open in some of the sort of west side precincts and things like that. So what happens as the votes are starting to come in? Or what are you seeing in terms of hitting your targets in those critical precincts, out in Augusta, and as it moves sort of west across the state as it usually comes in? Because Atlanta's always last, as we know.
I can't remember all of it. I really can't, because I had so many different responsibilities too as
sure.
the ED. I had like the data world.
Right, you're not the
war room.
campaign manager. That's
really
not
one of the biggest things I was doing was working with the voter protection people because that was like on fire with everything that was still coming in. But then also having to be like the morale booster for the staff, and we have all this team. But I remember them being good. I remember really outperforming in some places. That was, super, super exciting. I remember knowing that it was going to be very close. The other thing I remember too is the absolute astronomical number of provisional ballots that were given, and also the astronomical number of provisional ballots that were denied. So that was something else that we were dealing with quite a bit. But I think we were really hopeful. We knew it would be tight, but there was no indication that there was a clear loss or a clear win. But it was, we were doing well.
So it gets to be, late in the election day, and it's clear the election is very, very close, and Leader Abrams continues the campaign to have the votes counted and everything.
That's right. Like we all do now, chasing provisional ballots. Says election day is Tuesday, but it doesn't end until Friday. Right.
So was there still hope that the campaign would somehow make up?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think they did. I can't recall the numbers. I mean, I think more than 20,000 votes or something came in provisionally or something. It was quite a bit. There was so much incoming from so many different ways of people, that were unable to vote. There was vote by mail issues. There was provisional ballot issues. There were people who were told to go home, etc. It was chaotic those days afterwards. It was very chaotic.
What do you remember about the Abrams campaign's decision, or I guess Stacey Abrams' decision to suspend the campaign and concede that Governor Kemp was going to be Governor Kemp?
Well, I remember that day, and I'll never actually be able to forget it because, the New York Times, I think, took that photograph of Stacey giving her concession speech. And I'm standing right behind her in that black shirt, and man, do I look mad in that photo. I just remember sending it to my mom. I was like, I didn't know I could look that mad. I was spitting nails. It was me and Dubose and Janine, who I work with now, and we were all just, looks could kill. I remember going into headquarters and all coming around and being together. There was an incredible feeling of closeness and of family. There was a feeling of being wronged. Whether or not, let's say everything had gone perfectly, who's to say if Stacey were to win or not? I mean, like if everything had gone perfectly, honestly, I probably think she would have. But it felt wrong to lose and to have been wronged. because the campaign was never about Stacey really to begin with. I mean, it's Stacey, it's about her, but like she made it so about people and finding their franchise and finding their voice and participating. And so when you find the magic in that and like the beauty, like the depth of democracy in that, and then all you hear is about people who dove in to try and were denied. It was, it hurt spiritually. Like, I mean, so there was like a pain of her losing the campaign, but there was a pain of being wronged. So yeah, I just remember standing in that room. It was so cold in that room. It was like in this garage and all the press, you know, and I'm standing right behind her, me and Dubose, looking very mad apparently. And thinking that this is one of the most beautiful, brilliant speeches I've ever heard. And then knowing that it had wrapped up.
So what did that mean for you and the party, that campaign had wrapped up? What were the next steps for the party?
I had already knew that I was ready to move on from the party.
Sure.
I am what they would have called long in the tooth in party years. Most EDs don't last longer than a cycle. And I had been there through pretty difficult cycles too.
3 cycles,
you know,
yeah,
14, I'd been through, you know, the transition. I'd been there through the Trump presidency cycle. I'd been there through Ossoff cycle, which felt like a cycle because that was insane. And then of course 18, and I was ready to go spend time with my babies. You know, my littlest one, I would get up in the morning when he was old enough to take to daycare. I would, and then I'd go pick him up from daycare. I'd bring him back to the Union Hall till 9 p.m. and then I'd pack him up. And there was a pack and play over at headquarters, and we'd stay there till 1 o'clock. And then I'd get up to nurse a couple times in the night and get up at 6 a.m. and do it again. And I didn't see my 5-year-old at that point for much because I was gone before he was and home after he went to sleep. And I'm so lucky that I have an amazing husband. And you know, we divided and conquered because we thought it was bigger than us and for our kids. But I was ready not to do that again.
Sure.
I think I went to Great Wolf Mountain Lodge with my kids afterwards and really just kind of turned it off. We knew that the party was forever changed. You know, we hoped that Stacey would run again. We knew that there would be a presidential campaign coming up. We knew that Georgia was forever changed. We knew that there was a possibility of people who had signed up for a movement and it had to go on. I don't think any of us could have predicted Stacey's vision for what she did afterwards. I mean, I still think it's extraordinary. I of course work at one of her organizations, but you know, a lot of candidates, when they lose, they can be gracious, they can endorse, they can say thank you, see you next time, and then they usually go on to their jobs and make money until they decide to, you know, run again. And Stacey just really thought long and hard of, if I were to have won, you know, what did I want to do and what can I still do to do those things and how can I right some of these wrongs? And so she founded Fair Fight right away. I mean, Fair Fight was born in the days after the election with the voter protection efforts and with the filing of the lawsuits and everything that happened. You know, not long after that, and unbeknownst to me because she didn't tell me until January, Fair Count was born in her mind. It's actually one of my favorite stories. Stacey tells it of, you know, she says that she was sitting Shiva, you know, for those days after the election. Because it was a lot. It's a lot for one person to handle and to take in. And her littlest sister, Janine, was, you know, sort of assigned to check in on her. And Janine is an evolutionary biologist at the CDC who specialized in population everything. I don't know. She's brilliant. And Stacey asked her, you know, Janine, if you were to count everyone in the state, how would you go about doing it? Because she was thinking about the census. And she knew that if she were to have been governor, one of the first things she would have done is invest in the census to ensure that everybody is counted. And so she started to think about, well, maybe I can do that without being governor. And so she invited Janine, and Janine thought about it and went home and got so tickled by the idea, like made a PowerPoint and did all these things and was like, you know, this is how my evolutionary biologist, brilliant doctorate mind would go. And so Stacey's like, oh, that's pretty great. And then she called me and said, I want to start this thing called Fair Count. I want to get everybody counted in the census. At this point, I had told Stacey I was leaving the party. and then I was going to take 30 days, and I was going to get up and send my kids to school and work in the garden and take a nap and pick my kids up for 30 days. That was like my gift to myself. She's like, well, how about you come and start this new organization called Fair Count instead?
You didn't even get your 30 days?
I didn't even take a full week off between the party and starting Fair Count.
Good decision or bad decision?
Best decision of my life. Best job of my life. But I didn't know it at the time. She was just like, give me a couple months, help me get this off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you want to look for other
The soft
stuff,
sell.
if you want to do whatever, that's cool. But like, just help me with this. You know, it's one of those things where your friends know you better than you do. And she knew that I would fall in love with this position. And I did. So
what is it about this position? You know, because I think of the census and I'm thinking demographics and algorithms and you know, counting, you know, finding people and counting, which is maybe not that different from running campaigns of finding them, counting them, voting them.
Yeah, it's nerdy, which I love, you know, and it's the census is really the backbone of democracy. Mm-hmm. Without it, we couldn't have elections, we couldn't have redistricting, we couldn't have everything. And it is also the backbone of everything systemically, really, that is wrong. Undercounted communities are under-resourced, they're under-voiced in redistricting, they're underrepresented at the polls. Overcounted communities get more, and if we could somehow equalize it. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why some communities have crappier roads, worse schools, hospitals closing, because they're not getting their fair share. And the only way you do that is through the census. And so I love the idea of that. I love democracy, you know, and it's like it's the center point of democracy is having a fair and accurate census. Little did I know, you know, I wanted to get away from politics, frankly, that we would have the most politicized census in the history of the nation, you know, when Trump is doing all these different executive memorandums to try and cull different groups of people from it. And
in the midst of
the pandemic,
yeah.
You know, hits exactly 2 weeks before Census Day. But I love it, and I think what I love is it gave me a place for these unanswered or these unfulfilled hopes that I saw in these past experiences to really dive in. We do long-term, deep dive organizing that's based on power building in communities. You know, it's this idea of I'm not just going to show up 3 months before an election and ask for your vote and hope you do it, and then you're never going to hear from me again.
Right, the stereotypical.
You know? Yeah, which is so true. You know, particularly in communities of color and Black communities, absolutely taken for granted. And so I think Stacey really changed. She flipped the script on how you do organizing around civic power, because you don't organize for a candidate. You organize for communities to make change for themselves.
Right.
And it's what's missing in electoral politics. And so here comes Fair Count, a nonpartisan effort. I have no idea who people vote for, you know, and I don't care. I think democracy is stronger when we all participate and we get to continue to show up. So the communities that we worked with to get counted in the census, as soon as the census ended, much later than it was ever supposed to, we immediately went and called them and were like, hey, we're going to work on this general election now. You know, we're going to be doing this. People were so surprised to hear from us again. We really thought you would just be census. We didn't think you were actually coming back. And then we came back again for the runoff election. And then we started doing vaccines and getting mobile units and getting the internet installed and doing all these things after that. And then we came to them to work on redistricting. And now we're going to go do local redistricting and do the largest, you know, voter engagement education effort on the C3 side that I've ever been a part of, you know, for the 2022 midterm elections. And it's so exciting, the relationships and like the power that we're building in areas that had never had civic infrastructure resources. We don't work in the Atlanta metro area. You know, we work in places that have really been overlooked, that have perpetual vote share gaps, you know, that have been undercounted in the census. So yeah, it's so fulfilling. It feels like change. It feels like movement. And I don't work for a candidate and I don't work for a political party. I feel like I work for a voter.
Right.
And that is freeing in so many ways.
Well, obviously, you know, we went through the 2020 cycle and you said, you know, you took part in that, obviously from the 501c3 standpoint, as you said, which is nonpartisan. Would you agree that, you know, 2020, the outcome of the 2020 election is there a straight line from 2018 to 2020?
So yeah,
Or is that underselling the candidates themselves, the Democratic candidates themselves, the Joe Bidens, the John Ossoffs, the Reverend Warnocks?
I mean, I think I'm taking off my fair count hat for this. This is just Rebecca's personal political views, but it's a direct line with 2018. I mean, I think the infrastructure was built. Georgia's not going to go back. Like, Georgia's only going to go forward. We were slowly becoming a competitive state, 5.4 points over time until you get to no gap in 2018. And in 2020, I was not surprised that Georgia won. There's something about people accruing their power and using it, and like recognizing that and realizing they're never going to stop. I mean, we're not going to go back. There's not going to be a portion of the electorate that just is going to be like, I'm just going to sit this out now, unless they're given like a serious reason to. But, the pandemic absolutely made even more obvious and more clear, probably, to people who had always benefited, how large disparities are in our state. The American uprising against systemic racial violence and policing, to me, as like a movement watcher and seer and participator, we watched people move from sort of like a bravery to a fearlessness. It's like sort of what is there to lose? Like there was a desire to make things better. There's a massive desire for change. Rayshard Brooks was killed not far from here. And to see that, and to see the movement that erupted during a pandemic, and for people to still get together to ensure that their voices were heard, there was no doubt in my mind that they weren't going to show up at the polls and be heard en masse as well. I think what is surprising to some, not completely surprising to me, although just being a person who sees political statistics, cycle in and cycle out, there is something kind of astounding about it, is the numbers in the runoff election. I mean,
I'll admit that, as a historian, that was
it blows
surprising.
people away.
Very surprising.
The vote share gap in black voters actually shrunk by 0.7%. That's unheard of. In counties that we work in, like Randolph and other southern, southwestern counties, we're reaching 95, 96, 97% of general election turnout. That's incredible. That is an electorate, that is a population, that is a group of people that are, as we like to say, that are here to stay. They're here to participate and to demand that their voice be heard. And I think it's such an exciting time for Georgia.
You mentioned the pandemic, and you weren't with the party during the general or the runoff. So I just want to get your perspective from what you know. How did the pandemic affect how the Democratic Party ran its door-to-door campaign? Because I remember there was... You don't? I
don't know. I mean, we were doing door-to-door campaign stuff during the pandemic, so I can tell you like how we... But we're on the 501c3 side, so... But, a lot more mail, a lot more radio calls, teletown halls, digital relational organizing. It's my assumption that they did take some safety precautions and do some door-to-door.
Right.
But it made it so hard. It made it very, very difficult to communicate.
So you mentioned working with redistricting. What's your take on the maps that have come out and been approved so far? Surprised? Not surprised?
I mean, completely expected. I think that we're in for it a little bit. I think we're in a rocky road as we move through this. This is the first time without the provisions of pre-clearance with the Department of Justice and the Voting Rights Act. I'm so worried about precincts in the upcoming election. And we're going to be finding out about those soon. I think that there will be lawsuits on racial gerrymandering in some of these maps, that are coming out. Because we only have Section 2, to sue. Partisan gerrymandering got the big okie dokie from the Roberts Court. So, there's going to be some serious repercussions. Could they have been worse in Georgia? Sure. Could they have been better? By a lot. So, I think people expect politicians to be political. And so they're not that surprised by it. I think what is different this year is that more people were engaged in redistricting. Tons of C3s were engaged in redistricting with ideas of fairness. Leading institutional think tanks like Princeton Gerrymandering Project and others were able to give really data-driven examples of what fairness is. Like, fairness is not necessarily a subjective thing in the eye of the beholder. Fairness actually means partisan equity when you look at a series of elections after
Which
one
is
another.
what Justice Kennedy had asked
Right.
for.
That's right.
In I think the Wisconsin case was
Right.
how do you define fairness?
Like, how in Georgia do you have Democrats have just won statewide in the last 2 elections and came within 53,000 votes in the election before that? How do you have Democrats losing a congressional seat? I mean, that's absolutely not partisan equity. If there's 14 seats, they should probably be 7 Democrat and 7 Republican. And instead, the Democrats are going to even lose another one. So I think we get into it's just not good for democracy when you don't have people's voices reflected. And you can gerrymander your way for one party to represent a state that does not believe in you or your platform.
Well, to your point, we're seeing sort of the tit for tat, which is North Carolina, Georgia, Republican-controlled states are redrawing the districts to the benefit of the Republican Party. States like Illinois, Maryland, Illinois. There was some conversation of whether the Democrats were really going to push for a 14-2 Democratic map in Illinois. And I'm from Illinois originally. Basically just drawing everything into Cook County and the city of Chicago.
It's ridiculous.
Where does that stop?
I think it has
what's
to.
the logical
we
conclusion
have to move
that?
to independent redistricting commissions. I mean, again, and that's just me, and that's fair count too. Fair count. Partisan equity is not being partisan. It's ensuring that democracy is functioning in a way that is representative of the people. And if there's a district that should be drawn for Republicans, the district should be drawn for Republicans. And if it's if the district should be drawn for Democrats, or, one of the best equalizers in democracy is to draw competitive districts. The fact that we do not have competition in so many of our districts is only going to lend itself to more polarization and less consensus and coming together. Good competition is good for moderation and it's good for consensus building. And so, we need to get away from, just like we needed to get away from secretaries of states who run their own gubernatorial elections, we need to get away from politicians drawing their own districts. It should be a people-powered process. We should be picking them, not them picking us.
Well, I don't want to ask you get into too many specifics because you still are with fair count. But what's your take on the 2022 election as it's shaping up in Georgia? Now, obviously, this can be your personal opinion, but we don't need to get into too many of the specifics.
Yeah. Well, if in the edit, please do say that it's my personal opinion, and I'm off the clock while I'm doing this interview.
There you go.
So I think that it is Stacey Abrams' election. I think that it is absolutely hers. I think that should everything go well, that she will win. I think seeing the track of elections beyond, before, we're just better and better. I think that people are hungry for her and her leadership and her authenticity again. I think that personally, her and Warnock leading a ticket are the things that dreams are made of. They're phenomenal. There is a moral compass within the two of them that is the antidote, I think, to all this inflammatory, big lie, fraud, scare tactics that I think is probably one of the only things that can break through from those. And Georgia is getting more and more diverse and progressive and ready for change, I think, every day. And I think that the Republicans are going to have a really hard time with their primary.
And this primary being Governor Kemp and former Senator David Perdue.
I don't envy their party going through that.
Based on news reports, a lot of folks within the Republican Party aren't looking forward to it.
Yeah, I can't blame them. I mean, they came out swinging, and the vitriol day one was astounding. That's a lot of anger, fighting, and judgment for their party to listen to for, gosh, the next 5 months.
Yeah.
That sounds exhausting.
Do you think you do? The answer is yes. But why do you think the Warnock-Abrams ticket will be able to overcome the sort of structural disadvantage that the Democrats are going to have running against in a midterm where the Democrat holds the White House?
I don't think it matters.
Okay.
And I know people look at me when I'm crazy, about that, about like what happened in Virginia. Like, oh gosh, Terry McAuliffe won. That's going to be terrible for Georgia. No, it's not. Are we, frankly, all that surprised at a couple of the things, or that, people can be racist and others? No. Like, I feel like we've already been through that. We took a different route to battleground dumb, than other states. Of course, people are going to try and nationalize this campaign. Trump has already said he's going to be here for like every candidate at the top of the ticket. But this campaign is so uniquely about Georgia. And Senator Warnock and Stacey are so uniquely fighters for Georgia. And they will just keep it centered. I mean, there's so much to fight for in Georgia. There is the expansion of Medicaid. There is the equity in recovery, which we're not getting. There are places in Georgia without broadband. It's extraordinary. There is so much to fight for Georgia, and they are going to keep it grounded so much here because that is what they care about. I'm not concerned about Washington hurting the movement they are trying to play. I think that the Republican side is going to get real nationalized, because we saw what happened when, Trump came in the runoff election. To play or not to play, you're kind of dancing with the devil. And I think it's going to be very tricky on that side. And they can have that, and they can have the DC thing and all of that. I thought it was pretty interesting. David Perdue, who is somehow running as an outsider, which I don't understand, and I don't believe I'm just being partisan about this. He was a United States senator, and it broke that he was running for governor in Politico, the DC Beltway publication, that he was running as an outsider.
I think they used to call Politico the Tiger Beat of the Potomac.
Right.
Back when it first came out.
So, do words even matter anymore? I don't know. But I think deeds do. And so I think what we're going to see are brilliant campaigns run by two people. And in this case, I'm talking about Senator Warnock and Stacey Abrams, who really, truly care about Georgia, and who also really, truly care about people. They're not into one and done so that they can go make a name for themselves. If Stacey only wanted to make a name for herself, she would not have to run for governor and go through this again. She already has a name. She's doing it because she really cares, and she'd be really good at the job. And she believes, I think, in building this movement. And no matter how many things you say about that from any different angle, there's a truth to that will just shine through.
It seems like, obviously, the GOP holds all the constitutional statewide offices. Mm-hmm. It seems like the down ballot races are going to be are shaping up to be pretty competitive as well.
I am so excited. I am so excited about Bee Nguyen running for Secretary of State. Again, as the Democratic Party gets stronger and stronger and stronger, you're going to have stronger and stronger candidates up and down the ballot. And all of these positions, people, I think, will understand how important they are. Think about all of the people that have gotten absolutely nowhere with the labor commissioner since the pandemic struck, and all of the backlogs that have been happening with unemployment and all these different issues. You might not have understood what the Department of Labor did before, but you do now. You might not have understood what the Secretary of State was before until we have 3 recounts after a presidential election and egregious claims of fraud, and a Republican sitting Secretary of State that gets death threats for doing what any reasonable, rational person would say was the ethical right thing to do. if you didn't know what they do now, if you didn't know what they do, I think you do now. So there's new gravitas to these positions that speak to the people, I think, in ways that they didn't before.
Well, it seems like going back to something you said earlier. I was just jotting down some of the candidates, and obviously they have not won the primaries.
Oh gosh, they haven't even qualified. Right. So we're doing this before qualifying is months away.
April 2022. But Jen Jordan won a special in 2017 because that was Hunter Hill's seat. B. Wynn 2018, Matthew Wilson 2018. Yes. So these are, there's some talk that Josh McLaurin's gonna run for something or move up. So
and the chair of the Board of Education in Gwinnett talking about running for state school board.
Right.
Amazing.
And I think Jason Estevez is going to be running for I think.
The Senate or the House seat or something?
Yeah, for Jen Jordan's. I think what used to be the 5th Senate district. I don't know what the number is now or will be. I don't even know if it's been it has been finalized, but I don't know what the number is.
He's a good guy.
So, what to look forward to from for political for political buffs and folks who follow government and politics in Georgia. It's sort of the when you moved here in 2002, it was quite moving in a different direction as for you as a Democrat. So, as I say, times change.
That's right.
So, and I do you think we're here to stay as a competitive state for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be turning back. I think, as we see sort of the Midwest grow more conservative, I think we're going to see the South, grow more progressive. I'm really excited about some opportunities for some other states in the Deep South. Yeah.
Sure. Well, Rebecca, anything? I know we've touched on a lot. Anything else you'd like to record for posterity?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, on behalf of everyone at the Richard B. Russell Library, thanks for participating in this Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.